Hello again, and welcome back to this time an adventure in reading. Today I want to discuss the book that was discussed in the last Hatter Bookshop Book Reading Club, and that was The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. Um, in my discussion today, I'm going to try and be as spoiler-free as possible, although with me it's almost inevitable. There will certainly be some minor spoilers, most of which would get if you read the summary on the back. However, Poppy War is, I believe, the 2016 debut novel of R.F. Kuang. It is the first in a trilogy of books centered around this character, as I understand it. Um, and just to kind of set the tone for my thoughts on this book, um, the moderator of our book club at the beginning of every session asks us to go around and give the book of that particular meeting 5-star rating. As I recall, I gave The Poppy War 3 stars. Kind of for me, an up the middle, good but not great review. Um, the high uh, rating, as I recall, was I think 4.5 stars. The low was -1. And there were a variety of ratings across that 5-star scale around the room. Um, been thinking a lot about this book, and I think part of what really affected me about this book was it came on the heels of our last uh, read. In fact, I mentioned that in the discussion, and of course, the March book was A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. Um, and I don't want to compare the two books too much, but after I give you a brief summary, I think it's inevitable for me that because I had the book I read just prior to this was A Gentleman in Moscow, it affected the way I viewed it. The Poppy War is a grimdark fantasy set in um, a world that is very Asian analog. Um, the Empire of Nikon, which is, to my mind, an analog of medieval China, and their rivals, the Federation of Mungan, which reads very much like an analog of medieval Japan. So to my mind, we're talking about a setting in around the 11th or 12th century AD, kind of a Renaissance period for medieval China. Great strides in technology and the arts and philosophy. And so in the book you have printing and gunpowder, uh, and all sorts of technological advances that you normally wouldn't get in kind of the run-of-the-mill fantasy story. One of the things I really appreciated about it was that setting. This isn't, a generic Tolkien write-off. It is unique in the fantasy I've read, and I need to diversify in the fantasy I do read or have read. Back in the era when I was reading a book a day, that mythical time, I read a lot of fantasy, and this was far different than anything I was reading 30 years ago when I was in that mode. Um, it's the story of Ren, a war orphan who is about to go into an arranged marriage to a merchant, which she is repulsed by and despises. She's raised as a war orphan by a foster family who are merchants but are engaged in the illegal drug trade. Reference to the title. They are selling opium, and she wants desperately to have more choices in life and a better life. And the only real option she has is to use her brains to get out of her situation and to test well enough on the nation's civil service exams to get admittance into one of the academies, which will lead her to have a stepping stone up in society and to hopefully get a better life, a life with purpose and meaning, and she, as she thinks, more freedom. Now, of course, the only academy that she has the means to attend is the military academy of the country at, I believe, a city called Sinigard, for which she would not have to pay any money, would have room and board, basically the nation's military academy. And through the help of a local tutor, she's able to do that. And from here, I'm going to try and be very, very spoiler light. Now, of course, as her story begins, and she's going through training and assimilation at this academy, she's trying to figure out what her course of study is going to be. She's trying to find her way. She is really the odd person out. Um, Most of the people there are the children of nobles, who have had formal educations and lots of advantages in life. And it's really hard for her to break into that circle. Um, and this is set against an impending conflict that's brewing between her nation, the kingdom of probably the empire of Nakan, and the Mungan Federation, which is, like I say, to my mind, reading it just felt very much like she's in a Chinese analog empire, and their rivals are a Japanese analog state. They're referred to throughout the book as a federation. But in any event, there have been two prior wars between these nations, both of which her nation lost, but were able to survive through differing means. And as I said, there's a third conflict brewing. Um, and eventually war will ensue. Now, that's all I want to really say about the plot for now, as far as specifics, in case anybody wants to read the book, and I encourage you to do so. It is well worth reading. But in a lot of ways, uh, it's a very troubling book. And I think for me personally, and I mentioned this in the discussion of the book club, part of the reason why it is such a radical shift in tone from the March book we read in book club, which is, or was, A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. Of course, this is a very contemporary literary fictional novel. And this, of course, is set in a much older, much more brutal, much more violent setting. Um, but the philosophy of these books are just, to my mind, in such stark contrast. The Gentleman in Moscow was a story about a man trying to find meaning in his life, and through his trials and tribulations, which are in a very small setting. It's confined to one building in Moscow in the early to mid 20th century. But he's trying to find purpose in his life. Um, and A Gentleman in Moscow is very life affirming. As I said, I believe in my video for that read, A Gentleman in Moscow, it's a book about conserving things that are valuable. It's about finding purpose in life, doing things well, raising children. It's about hope for the individual and the next generation. And the Poppy War could not be more different. It is a story about power and the price of power, and in a lot of ways, it's very anti-life. Um, there is killing and genocide on huge scales in this book. In fact, scales so huge that when I got to the end of it, knowing that this is the beginning book in a trilogy, my thought was, how on earth can you go dramatically from this forward? It seems as if it's already reached a pinnacle in the story. So I'm tempted to go ahead and keep on reading in this series just to see how that could be accomplished. Um, I have a couple of friends who are proceeding to read the rest of the trilogy, and I'm told no, it's still very good. In fact, they're in the middle of reading the second book, and they were folks who gave this book a very high rating. They say the series is getting better. They would agree with my critiques, I think, about just the vast scale of violence and death here, and about the acceptance of power. I think very foolishly, and giving in to darker powers um, without understanding what you're sacrificing and without thinking of the consequences of that. It's also a story about gaining power too easily, uh, in my opinion. Um, the main character has a mentor who's trying to train her to utilize power, but to do it responsibly and carefully and with discipline. And our main character here, Ren, wants to take all the shortcuts she can, and she's more than willing to sacrifice everything and everyone around her for a gain in the moment. I say radically different than the protagonist in A Gentleman in Moscow. Um, and obviously they're in different genres, very different books, but that's just what I kept coming back to. Um, the world is well built, which is a thing you always look for in fantasy writing. It has a magic system. There is magic in the book. It's based on shamanism in ancient Chinese ideas about magic and supernatural power, which I thought was really, really interesting. Those are the things I really liked about this book: the world building, the magic system, the cultural stuff, um, and especially knowing a little bit about Chinese history, very little bit, finding those little Easter eggs. She's at a military academy, and they're studying the works of their great military scientist Sun Tzu, who sounds a whole lot like Sun Tzu in our world. I think they fairly accurately quote a lot of his sayings and ideas and theories about warfare. Um, the war itself that ensues, the Third Poppy War, um, to me felt very, very much like an analog of a war not too long ago in our own history. It felt very much like the Second Sino-Japanese War that happened from 1937 to 1945. In terms of its brutality, um, and just it's just horrendous scale, and also the motivations behind it. There, in the discussion for this book in the book club, there was a lot of talk about genocide and how normal people, normal, relatively decent folks, can be um, tempted, shall we say, or accepting of mass murder and being participants in it. And we talked about how if you can make your enemy not human, if you can other your enemy, as the social scientists say these days, if you can make your opponent, like I say, not real, if you can make them less worthy than you, then it's easier to accept doing horrible, brutal things to them. And it's a good thing to get from this book because there are passages where I know where Ren and her friends see their first soldiers from the rival empire, the Mungans, and her thought is, these people look just like the people in the town where the Singard Academy is. They look just like us. They don't look like Ren. Ren is of a different ethnicity than most of the characters in the book, but they look like the people. These people look very similar, and they're slaughtering each other without any compunction whatsoever. And that's food for thought because, in our own history, obviously, we have plenty of examples of that. Um, the people who, it's YouTube, so I don't want to get too graphic, even at my small scale. Um, but yeah, in Europe, in the middle of the 20th century, there was one group of people who committed mass murder um, in camps of another ethnicity that they blamed for their problems and they scapegoated. And if you looked at these people, they didn't look that different. They did not, superficially, they did not look that different. And that's the case here. Um, and, I think works like this, even though they are very dark, very violent, are good to consume for that reason. It makes you think about what it takes to commit these horrendous acts of hatred, true crimes against humanity, and loss of your humanity, allowing that to happen. Um, for those reasons, I really liked the book. Once again, it had some plotting issues. I wish, like I said, she had a well-developed world and a lot of well-developed systems. I wish that had played more into the story. There is a scene where she and one of her colleagues at the academy are fighting a very mythological based monster. I loved that scene, how they dealt with it, just the uniqueness of this encounter that they have, and I wanted more of that. I wanted more of that sort of thing derived from from the mythologies that inspire this. Yeah, if you understand what I'm saying. But in any event, um, once again, a tough read in a lot of ways. Um, not literally reading as far as turning the pages, but hard to digest and oftentimes hard to react to. Um, like I said, a lot of things going for it, and I think from what I'm told, if I venture on in this series to the next book, that I'm told I will like it better, and could be. So I think I will give it a shot. Um, anyway, those are my thoughts for this book. Like I say, it's not a go yell go call it on the mountain kind of recommendation, but it was worth reading. It's worth reading. Glad it is. And so far, every selection we've had in the book club, I'm walking away with from an experience that I'm glad I had. Um, and just by way of announcement, the next meeting will be next this coming Saturday, which I believe is May 17th. The book for the next meeting will be the latest installment in the Hunger Games series. Oh, get rid of that glare. Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. I finished this book. I have quite a few thoughts about this book as well. Um, and as a special part of the discussion for this book, I'm told there will be a Hunger Games trivia contest, and the person who does the best in that contest will get the next book um, for the next for I guess it'd be the June meeting for free. And if you already own it, then the one after that, the store will provide to you for free. So I thought, oh, that's very very neat prize for a very neat contest. And we're gonna have our own quarter quell, but instead of trying to do each other violence, we're gonna see who understands and remembers the Hunger Games series better. Um, I I'm going to try and going forward do a review video like this for every one of the books we read in book club. It's been a great experience, and it means at the very least I'll read 12 books this year, or at least double it, because I'm thinking I'm averaging reading 2 books a month now, which I know on book two that's pretty meager, but it's much better than years past. Um, I am reading much more now than I have been, and I have friends I know who will put me to shame because they posted on Facebook talking about the 20 books they read this month. And I remember those days when I could do that, and I'm sure I can do it again. But I'm starting slowly. In any event, um, this time next month, I will be talking to you about Sunrise on the Reaping, sharing my thoughts on that, and potentially some of the discussion from other folks in the book club. Um, and if you want to read more, that is an excellent mechanism to do it. Um, the book club has been a great experience. I've never been involved in one until this one started this year. Um, we've had 4 meetings. We're about to have our 5th. The discussions in each are wonderful. People have insights that you'd never think of for the books you're reading, and it's just so much more fun. And as well, my wife hasn't been participating in the book club, but we've been reading the books together as we go, and that's been a great experience. Particularly the last 2, we've had tons of very interesting conversations about both the Gentleman in Moscow and the Poppy War, um, uh, and uh, and I'm sure we'll have some more about Sunrise on the Reaping. Oh, and my daughter. This is actually my daughter's copy, and she read it as well. I'm trying to coax her into going to the club. think she'd have a great time. But anyway, with that, I think I will wrap it up. I will talk to you again soon. And in the meantime, good reading and stay safe.